So Jack, one of the underpinnings of the great game of business seems to be the concept of open book management. And it's both one of the most exciting and one of the most fearful aspects of this whole concept, that I'm going to share my financials with my employees. How did that whole concept get started?
Our first step into open book management occurred on February 1st, 1983, on our very, very first day of business. International had fired all of us, and we rehired everybody back. And the only financials I had at that time when we brought everybody back were two numbers. Was $8.9 million worth of debt and $100,000 worth of equity. And I had a sign, okay? I had $8.9 million on one side, I had $100,000 on the other side. And I said to the people in the opening, I said, look, I hate to be so crass, but our business is to create cash. That's what our business is to do. And I said, I have learned that cash only goes to 7 or 8 spots. That's all, 7 or 8 buckets: receivables, inventories, the fixed assets that you have, debt coverage, paying retained earnings, paying taxes, saving something for a rainy day. I said, it's not that complicated, all right? And the whole concept is, once we create the cash, is how do you put a little bit in every bucket to be able to survive? The debt bucket is very high. But the minute we start paying down that debt, that becomes equity, all right? You go from debt, you go to ownership, all right? That's the game that we are going to play. That's the end result. Debt to equity is what you look at when you look at job security, okay? And right now, we're comatose. We're brain dead. At 89 to 1, we shouldn't even be alive. And in fact, they didn't even bring our lending officer in, and they fired him for booking bad loans, and we were one of those bad loans, to tell you how bad it was. So we started out with the simple concept of 89 to 1. Now, I went on the floor, and I realized I had made a really, really serious mistake. I did not negotiate an IT contract from International. I was still, in that big brother syndrome, big checkbook syndrome. I worked for this company all my life. Everything is always there. And then all of a sudden, I realized that they shut off my IT. Now I got a bank that's furious, okay, because they realize they've done an 89 to 1 loan. And they want cash flow statements every week instead of every month. And they're sending liquidation trailers down from Chicago because they're so furious, and I've got no information system. So what I did was really simple. I went out there and I took a blank income statement and a blank cash flow statement. And I went to every single line on my income statement, and I found out that there was an actual person in my company that was responsible for every line. It was revealing. It was, and we had spent millions of dollars with a consulting company called Proudfoot that rewrote all our job descriptions inside the Fortune 500 company. And how could they have missed that? How could they have missed that you had people responsible for sales, you had people responsible for material, you had people responsible for labor? So I took what the Venetian monks put together, in terms of that income statement, and I just moved over the lines, and I put in people's names. I mean, it was so simple. I mean, it was just, and so I would go to somebody, and Bob in sales, I said, Bob, what are we going to sell for the month? Bob would then tell me what we were going to sell. Then I went to Bev Willis in accounting. I said, what did we cost that out at? Then I went to Joe Lober, who had labor. Then I went to Irene Schaefer, who had material. All right, and all of a sudden I began to realize that, standards in a company are standards that people set for each other. I mean, we got this all wrong. I mean, well, what numbers are nothing more than stories about people. That's what numbers are, all right? And so I began to have very, very accurate forecasts, because we began to sit there on a Wednesday, bring all the principals in, everybody that owned the line. They then went up and posted on the line. They got up. The peer pressure was extraordinary, okay, because everybody could see the ownership, all right? And then all of a sudden the competition got to be the better part of everybody else, okay? And we had unbelievably accurate forecasts that even the banks were surprised at. And banks can handle a lot of stuff, okay, but they can't handle bad forecasts. If you give a bank a bad forecast, especially as a startup, all right, they're going to look at you as bad management. Well, I was getting it right from the horse's mouth, and that was the beginning of the whole conceptual idea of open book, was to be able to give people the costs, give them the expenses, okay, show them how it all related, show them where they made a difference in terms of the financials, and make the financials become a breathing element of the business, okay? It got to the point that if we took the numbers away from the people today, they couldn't operate at all.